that Writers Atelier, writersatelier.com, A-T-E-L-I-E-R. It's French, bitch. Okay. Middle school. 3 months before Pedro tried to rob me at a middle school dance, we bobbed beside each other at a 5th grade classmates' pool party, exchanging yo mama jokes. I was unsupervised more often than not. In 3 years, I didn't read a single book. Both my girlfriends were 8 inches taller than me. I walked to school and never skipped a class. Cafeteria food floated in its own water on styrofoam lunch trays. TVs rolled into classrooms on tiered metal carts. In biology, we mostly watched nature videos. Miss Adair was visibly shaken when all the TVs were checked out for the OJ verdict. I remember sitting in her class, watching crocodiles attack a troop of monkeys on a distant African shore. One monkey's arm was torn off in the fray, but he stayed to fight amid the splashing and teeth, trying to free his friend from the jaws of a croc by beating it on the head with his own dismembered limb. I don't think middle school is a metaphor for anything. I think my backpack was too heavy. I wore jeans with pockets that stretched down to the ankles. I drew too many anarchy symbols to be taken seriously as an anarchist. I shot bottle rockets at my friends and had bottle rockets shot at me in return. I was twice mistaken for a girl. Once by a flight attendant, once by a construction worker. I recall 3 incidents that could have ended in kidnapping. While fishing in a canal with James, a man wearing a mesh trucker hat and aviator sunglasses approached us. There was a hole in the middle of his greasy t-shirt where he said his wife had stabbed him with a samurai sword. He turned around to show us the hole in the back where the sword had come out. In one hand, he held a grocery bag full of tall boys, an air rifle in the other. He set up the cans and shot at them from our side of the street across traffic until the cops came. I threw sharp pencils into the asbestos ceiling tiles. I threw erasers spiked with paper clips into the asbestos ceiling tiles. I threw unused tampons down the halls. I punched boys in the arm and was punched in return to see who could hit hardest. I had a recurring dream about losing all my teeth. Mike was the only friend I was embarrassed to be seen with. His ears were full of wax and his house reeked of smoke. He had a computer with folders and folders of porn. He printed me a copy of the Anarchist Cookbook, but I was too scared to make anything except a tennis ball bomb, which is when you cut open a tennis ball and pack it with strike anywhere match heads. I rode through the slums of Honduras tucked between my parents in a cab. I skated through the slums of Miami and sailed home on the piss-soaked metro rail. My dad always drove with a glass of scotch in the cup holder. Every drive felt like a long drive, and Miami streets seemed so endlessly straight that you could conceivably drive in massive circles without ever knowing it. I counted the glowing plazas, Publix and Blockbuster always nuzzled together, and signs for politicians springing up like mushrooms on the corner of every street. I played sports with neighborhood kids in the middle of the street. I was a bad sport. I was lifted off the ground by my neck for being a bad sport. I played with some new kids on a different block, and a blonde boy named Billy held my arms while a blonde girl named Margaret hit me. She said it was because I had black hair. Kenny wore eyeliner and carried a leather-bound journal that he'd splattered with paint and on which he'd scrawled the words "emotional spill." One night Kenny was wandering around our neighborhood when some people cracked his head with a lead pipe and took his Walkman. When the doctor said he could no longer play sports, he did not take the news very hard. Mr. Ferguson was known to use the same urinal at the same time each day until his name appeared over that urinal in black Sharpie. We joked that Miss Sucrette did coke. Mr. Clark founded a soul label in Overtown and was allowed to wear sunglasses in the classroom. Miss Wilhelm once implied that homosexuality was unnatural by banging 2 locks together. When OJ was found not guilty, Miss Davis ran down the halls yelling, "We won." Eric invented an apocalyptic Christian cult. He believed the mobile ram was a satanic symbol and that the end of days would be brought on by Procter & Gamble. He burned American flags in a field and wore the remaining grommets on a string around his wrist. Going to church felt like a pointless obligation. We didn't go often, and my parents didn't know any of the rituals. When people lined up for communion, my dad said to go ahead. So I did, and when I reached the front of the line, I pinched the wafer from the priest and I took it back to my seat for observation. My mom said I should put it on my tongue and kneel down to pray. I prayed for a Super Nintendo. I sensed that my parents did not love each other. I was only interested in playing power chords. I found it important to know how many people were in certain punk bands. I wrote on my backpack with whiteout. My grandfather lost all his teeth in the Blitz. I tried to understand the war stories he told before he died. My grandmother died shortly after him. My mother found the obituary in the Herald on the flight home from Honduras. When we got home, my uncles had divided up her things, including a box full of poetry that is currently being eaten by silverfish in an attic. I listened to music while the TV was on mute. I took a lot of stock in t-shirts. I had an unconscious habit of tucking my hair behind my ears. I squinted as I did this, and I wore a shit-eating grin. This was pointed out to me by my best friend, who has the same name as me. I navigated large swaths of the city without a car or smartphone. I was called a pussy by strangers in passing cars on countless occasions. There was a drug dealer who haunted Continental Park. He would pull up in a silver Mercedes and interrupt our basketball games to call us pussies because we wouldn't buy drugs from him. His most notable feature was the pinned-back sleeve of an oversized Nike t-shirt. There was air where his arm should have been. The missing arm was somehow the least ridiculous thing about him. It was rumored that he carried 2 guns, and when someone asked him why a guy with 1 arm needed 2 guns, the drug dealer said it was so he didn't have to reload. I'm not sure why I'm telling you any of this. My friend's older sisters were openly attracted to me, but always lamented that I was too young for them. I played Truth or Dare with Larry Bird's niece. My orthodontist was arrested for selling marijuana seeds over the internet. My grandparents' urns sit in my mother's bedroom closet beside a stack of shoeboxes. I watched the Spice Channel after school with Katie and some other kids whose names I can't remember. We watched in silence, as if it were an intensely interesting instructional video. I accompanied girls to the mall, to a clothing store that was formerly the site of a famous drug massacre. I received a handjob in art class, but not to completion. I bought a quart of Old English from a homeless man named Tiny. He kept the change from a $10 bill and left the bottle in the bushes across the street from the convenience store. I remember he didn't have any teeth. Every boy who went to Jenny's house had to whip it out. I inhaled a CO2 cartridge and stared up into the hot sun as my head throbbed. I lay in bed with my friend's sister and her friend, doing nothing, listening to TLC. I smoked pot in Continental Park on countless occasions, but the one time I was almost arrested, I was not high, I didn't have pot on me. I laughed when the cop asked if I had any gang-related tattoos. He said, "Is that funny?" I said, "Yes." My second girlfriend carried coke in an Altoids tin and claimed the drugs were crushed up mints. Through a few loopholes I won't really get into, I was confirmed a Catholic. My mom took me to visit this weird kid from school. He'd been accidentally shot by his friend who was showing off his dad's gun. I stood in his living room holding a massive black trash bag full of stuffed animals. The floors of his house were hard and shiny and reminded me of a convenience store. The kid came out from the hallway and he wasn't wearing a shirt or shoes, and that made me uncomfortable. But by the time I'd seen the movie posters in his room and we talked about video games, it wasn't weird when he lifted the bandage and showed me his marbled skin. It was a shotgun, he said. He nearly blew my arm off. I did not receive any superlatives. I did not keep in touch. As my last will and testament, I bequeathed nothing to no one. I signed my name in people's yearbooks as Huge Erection. Most of the time, I'm only embarrassed when it's too late. Thanks.